Hello again, children. So, yesterday you had a go at writing about the River Amazon. Today you're going to have a go at writing about the River Thames, but this time we're going to be thinking very carefully about comparing the Thames with the Amazon. So, when you write about the Thames, you need to make reference to the Amazon. To help you out with this, yesterday I showed you a text about the River Nile. Today I'm going to show you a text about the River Ouse, which is a river that runs through the city of York. So, when I've written about the River Ouse, I have compared it with the River Nile. So here's my first part of the River Ouse, and it should stick to these ideas. Where's its source? How long is it? Where does it flow? What are its tributaries? So let's read it together first. As I'm reading, I want you to look for places where I have compared it to the River Nile and what language have I used to make the comparison. Okay, here we go. The River Ouse. This river is on the island of Britain and runs through a number of English counties, including North Yorkshire, the Yorkshire Dales, and the East Riding. Unlike the Nile, the River Ouse is not world famous. However, it is most famous for being a river in Yorkshire running through the city of York. At only 84 kilometres in length, the River Ouse is short in comparison to the Nile. However, just as the source of the Nile is disputed, so too is the source of the River Ouse. Some people believe it rises in the Yorkshire Dales, but others think its source is in the North York Moors. What is known for sure is that it has at least 9 tributaries, including the rivers Oare, Don, Aire, Wharfe, and Rother. Okay, so as you can see, I've stuck with the structure of saying where it is and saying how long it is and saying where it starts. But what I want us to look at today are the words and phrases that I've been using to compare the River Ouse with the River Nile. So one of the things that I've done is this phrase here, unlike the Nile. So when you're writing about the River Thames, for example, you could say, unlike the Amazon, the River Thames is. So it's when you're saying that it's not like the Nile. So unlike the Amazon, the River Thames has a clear source. But obviously that sentence will come lower down in the text. Okay, so I've said how long it is, and I've said this in comparison to the Nile. So at only 84 kilometres in length, the River Ouse is short in comparison to the Nile. I'm saying when you compare the two rivers, the Nile is significantly longer. And I said something, so here it's where it's different, and here it's where it's different. But I've also said something about it being the same. Just as the source of the River Nile is disputed, so too is the source of the River Ouse. So I've made a comparison. Just as the source of the Nile is disputed, so too the source is the source of the River Ouse. So if I were to write a paragraph about the Thames, I might say, just as the River Nile is world famous, so too is the River Thames, because they're both famous rivers in the world. And actually, although the Amazon is much longer than the Thames is still as famous. So the Amazon and the Thames are famous. Just as the source of the River Amazon is disputed, I'm not going to say that, am I? Just as the River Amazon is world famous, so too is the River Thames. Okay. And actually, I've sort of hinted here. I haven't used words, so I'm going to underline it rather than highlight it. But I've just sort of hinted that there's a difference here as well, because the River Nile, you sort of think it's got two main tributaries, the Blue Nile and the White Nile. However, the River Ouse has got lots and lots of tributaries, including these rivers listed here. So when you're writing about the River Thames, you still have to include the facts that you know, but now I'm looking for these special words and phrases that compare the two rivers. If you keep the structure of the paragraph the same, it will automatically make a comparison, but we also need to include some of these comparing words and phrases. Another one that we might have a look at, if we look at this paragraph again, when I read it to you, I want you to listen for the information, but I also want you to look for things where words that I'm using to compare the two rivers. The River Ouse flows through the city of York and through the towns of Selby and Goole before joining the River Trent to become the River Humber, then goes on to form the Humber Estuary. It is interesting to note that, unlike the Nile, the Ouse has over 13 bridges, the most famous being the Ouse Bridge in the centre of York. As part of the River Humber, its final bridge is the world-famous Humber Bridge, once the largest single-span suspension bridge in the world. The River Ouse is famous for its winter floods and, like the Nile, a construction, a Fosse barrier, has been designed to reduce the damage that these floods can cause. As it reaches the North Sea, the mouth of what is now the River Humber forms an estuary, the Humber Estuary, which is approximately 13 kilometres wide. This is in sharp comparison with the vast size of the Nile Delta. Another sharp contrast with the River Nile is that, as a whole, the Ouse Basin is approximately only 10,704 square kilometres. Okay, did you see the words that I used to help to compare the two rivers? Let's read it together and spot them together. The Ouse flows through the city of York and through the towns of Selby and Goole before joining the River Trent to become the River Humber, that then goes on to form the Humber Estuary. It is interesting to note that, unlike the Nile, there's my phrase, unlike the Nile, although to be honest, that's a lovely phrase to have at the beginning of a sentence, isn't it? Unlike the Nile, the Ouse has over 13 bridges, the most famous being the Ouse Bridge in the centre of York. As part of the River Humber, its final bridge is the world-famous Humber Bridge, once the largest single-span suspension bridge in the world. The River Ouse is famous for its winter floods and, like the Nile, so I've got unlike the Nile, like the Nile, a construction, the Fosse barrier, has been designed to reduce the damage that these floods can cause. As it reaches the North Sea, the mouth of what is now the River Humber forms a famous estuary, the Humber Estuary, which is approximately 13 kilometres wide. This is in sharp comparison with the vast size of the Nile Delta. Another sharp contrast with the River Nile is that, as a whole, the Ouse Basin is approximately only 10,704 kilometres squared. So as you can see, all of my blue highlighting here shows a comparison with the Nile. I'm going to add in the Fosse barrier because the comparison with the Nile would be the Aswan Dam. I'm going to add in the Humber Estuary because the comparison with the Nile would be the Nile Delta. And I've also said that the floods can cause damage, which is the same as the River Nile. The River Nile's floods caused damage. So you can see some of the words, some of the facts that I've used have also been in comparison with the River Nile. So, yesterday we looked at information about the River Nile, and today we've given similar types of information about the River Ouse. And because we've kept the structure the same, it's compared immediately with the Nile. But also, I've used some of these fancy phrases that help with the comparison. Like the Nile, unlike the Nile. In sharp comparison, in sharp contrast. And we've also got just as the source of the Nile, so too. I like that one. Just as, so too. That's a nice one to use. Okay, so your job today is to do exactly the same as yesterday. I need to move that one like I did yesterday. In your first paragraph, you're going to describe where the Thames is. You're going to say how long is it, what's its source, what counties does it run through, does it have any tributaries, that sort of thing. And when you're describing that, you're also comparing it with the River Amazon. And then in your second paragraph, you're looking at cities that it flows past, or landmarks, or flooding, whether it's a delta or an estuary, what ocean or sea does it flow into, the basin size, etc. So you would then have two paragraphs that you've already written yesterday about the River Amazon, and two paragraphs that you've written today about the River Thames, and that will form your comparison text. So, just like yesterday, have a go at writing them down. If you would like to photograph it and send it to me, or if you want to do it as a Word document and send it to me, or if you want to do it as a Google Doc and send it to me, I'd really like to see what you've come up with.